we talked about citizenship, and today it's about the role of the designer. It's about immersive storytelling and design, and I want to very much thank Hogeschool for welcoming us here for this whole day today. And I want to give a word to Vander, whom you remember from the NFF symposium, to say a little bit about the structure of the day.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dora. Well, very much welcome here in Breda at Communication and Multimedia Design, which is the academy where you're now in, brand new building. So we're setting things up. But I invite you to walk around and check out the space and the facilities, which might be interesting for you as well to broaden your mind in ways in which to develop your concepts, and also to think about new ways how you can design interaction, not only by using traditional media, but maybe using technology in ways which are unexpected and can be used to engage an audience on different levels. We have time in the program for that, so if you want, I can give a short tour around the building. Today, as Goda explained, will be about the designer, because thinking about storytelling and working from a design perspective is different from an authorship perspective. Very nice.
Yeah, what is this? It looks like my lungs.
It's upside down.
Oh, all right. It's a mountain. Okay.
Upside down mountain.
All right. You talk on. I'll try to do some.
Upside down presentation.
Yeah. This is very deliberate.
Yeah, working from a design perspective is different because
Dit is ook goed. Ja, die in het midden misschien ook.
artistic discipline also always have intended audiences, use your products or which engage with your message or your communication design. So also in storytelling, the design perspective forces you to think through what your intended message will be and how an audience will interact with it. So
This is already a nice exercise in interaction, right?
great interaction design.
All the blood is in my head.
Communication multimedia design, which you are here, we use very different kinds of media. So from traditional media as print to audiovisual media, but also installation works and interactive interface design, which can be used at different audiences, but also in different situations. So thinking through the possibilities of technologies and the ways of engaging an audience is also a very important aspect of designing our story. Also the design perspective, also I think within the art academy.
Oh, yes, well,
No. Ik denk jouw fix al even.
Ja, dat is ook. Maar
The method.
Ja.
Oké, moet je wel blijven staan, hè, Pieter?
Even kijken, wat is het menu? Deze.
The method we educate young professionals to become designers is also an interesting aspect we want you to take away from today, because it may differ from an artist perspective, and it does certainly differ from an academic perspective. The ways in which you have to get your ideas out of your head as soon as possible in a process. Try to prototype them, try to test, experiment with it, try to use creative techniques to look at the problem from a different angle and really find specific design tools you can use to sharpen your idea and to draw it into a direction that might be different from the direction of your concept is taking. So we are going to work on that today. But first we have two presentations. JanJaap is a colleague of mine. We worked together for 9 years. 10 years. And JanJaap is a visual designer, graphic designer. Did his master's at St. Joseph's Academy of Arts. He was trained as an artist as well. Now he works in Amsterdam at the same day. We miss him every meeting. And JanJaap has been responsible within the same day to think about ways in which the methodology of design can be used. So he designed new ways of thinking about what is that process. Are there different aspects to it, and how can we think about what design is and what design can do. I thought it would be really interesting for you to have this presentation, especially from the academia, but also I think from people I know who get involved in the art. Next will be a presentation by Nienke Uitgegaan, who is involved in a project called Hackstory. And Hackstory is a new way of participating professionals from diverse perspectives for creating interactive stories. So that shows in her talks and goes into the practice of making an immersive story design, interactive story design, in a hackathon kind of way. People work together on concrete goals, short term and personal. Then we have lunch, which will be also delivered here, I hope. And in the afternoon, two other colleagues of mine will join us. Marcel van Gagel, who's an artist, performance artist, visual artist, and Frederik Mueller, who's a documentary filmmaker. And they will join us to discuss your ideas. And I also want you to work on trying to visualize the ideas you have today. So at the end of the day, it's about 4 5. Any questions so far? Okay. JJ.
Get some more coffee first.
They can be separated from their education. So it's not based on mindset or something, but it's based from their training. If you're trained in art, there's specific methodologies you use to solve certain problems you have. And artists always works from within. Okay. So there's also always an individual autonomous drive that makes him or her choose which problems to handle and tackle. The academic is of course trained to gather knowledge. That's basically, I mean, an academic tries to understand reality. That is, certainly we use methodologies to come up with knowledge of a certain thing. And the designer is always driven from an outside problem from without. He or she has to make a connection to the problem. But there's always external input that feeds the design process. And all research is used within a design project to solve certain problems, certain practical problems. So it's very pragmatic. When you have to solve something for an academic, you have to broaden the knowledge base. It doesn't have to be practical, an interesting part. But you are engaged in a project now, of course, those two worlds really come together, like the knowledge base and the practical side. Does that answer your question? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We'll come to it. I think I'll just start because this is a nice introduction to some of the things I will be talking about. It will be a lot. It will be. This is me. So one already introduced me. What I want to sort of talk about is emphasize a part of the design process which I hope you are still in, which is the discovery phase of design. So not really knowing what you want to know, mixing concepts and not really doing something with it already. What is design? What is it good for? So first, the image is a bit distorted, but I'll leave it like this. So we as designers work with models, just like in academia. You try to grasp reality by representing it in models, and this is a really nice model. I guess this you all know, and this you also know. This is the interesting zone where you're actually sort of in panic, but you're also doing it in a really comfortable way, and that's when you start learning. So there are obviously a lot of perspectives on design, and a lot of definitions, and a lot of paradigms. One is, of course, that design is about making things beautiful. Another one is that design is about learning. Another one is that design is about creating things. I guess the truth is somewhere in the middle. But I think what's relevant for you now, for this project, as far as I've understood it, is not looking at design like making things beautiful, but making sense of things. That's actually, I think, what design is all about. So this is a very nice representation of a design process. There's a question, there's a challenge, there's some fuzzy things happening, and out comes money, or product that makes money. So I collected some basic models of design, and this you probably know as well. There's something you put in, there's some process, and there's something coming out. This is a bit more elaborate, so this process is actually made out of sub-processes, and you can define it, and something comes out again. In basis, what's quite important, and you will recognize this from the academic perspective, it's all about analysis and synthesis. I'll get back to that later. Because another way to say it from a user perspective in design is that it's about fulfilling needs of people. And there's factors, there's relationships, there's principles, there's forms, and something comes out. Basically, whatever model you look up about design, these are almost always the crucial steps that are involved. So it's about ideate, selecting, and implementing of solutions and testing them in real life. So this is a really interesting model by Christopher Alexander, and it describes in a very abstract way that this is the model that, take a carpenter, and he wants to have a seat, so he starts carving and makes a seat, and that's it. So this is the context, he makes a form, and that's it. The second model is where you have a self-conscious designer who thinks, I want to design a chair. So what he does, he takes the context, he makes a mental picture, he says, wouldn't it be nice if I had this chair? He makes it in form, and somebody else makes the chair. That's actually what this is about. The carpenter didn't make this, it's based on a mental picture. And the third form that's really interesting is when you have this mental picture and you make in concrete reality the mental picture, and then you bring it into the world, and then you reflect on it. So the difference here is that you can draw blueprints, or you can create something directly. This is a third way of designing. It's about developing mental pictures, making them in the real world, reflecting on them, making mental pictures again, making new models, and adapting the cycle. So it's actually about having a dialogue with reality. I think a lot of academic disciplines work in models and don't put them in the real world, so they stay models and you reflect on them that way. I think in design it's always important that you make them really tangible, and then you reflect on what's happening. I think that's a big difference. So, back to analysis and synthesis, which you can also translate into converge and diverge. I don't know if you're familiar with those terms, but I think they're the basic DNA of any creative endeavor. You have to create a lot of options, which is to diverge, and then you converge that meaning into some ideas, and then you diverge again. So it's about opening up, closing down, opening up, closing down. That's what's happening all the time. Here you see it reassembling, break it into parts, and this is probably familiar to academics as well. You have a problem, you make sub-problems, sub-problems of sub-problems, and then you deconstruct it. So that looks something like this. These are all models. This is the really linear way of looking at problem solving. So there's a problem, and there's something happening, and there's a solution. While in reality, problems are in the eye of the beholder. Who states what the problem actually is? It can be a client. Your client can say, I want people to do this, and they don't do it, so that's my problem. And then you have to solve it. I think in reality, the problem is always relative. Maybe there's not such a thing as a problem. Maybe there's a solution first, which makes evident that there's a problem anyway. So it's actually about a dialogue between problems and solutions. It's not one or the other. So this is really important. And I think for your project, as far as I've read it, there's no problem anyway. So how do you design when there's not a problem? That's an interesting question, I think. So I like this sheet particularly. This is also a design process. So there's a kickoff, maybe that was like a couple of weeks ago. You think, wow, I'm going to do it. And then in the third step, you think, shit, this is not going to work. And there's chaos. And then you look for the guilty. It's the assignment, it's the teacher. And then finally, you think, okay, I'm going to go really bureaucratic on this one. I just need a list of requirements. Tell me what to do. We see this happening a lot. Punishment of the innocent is also really important. Okay, so I think the model, I'll show you a model that we came up with here in Breda, which is based on all these models. But this is a really famous model from a company that's called IDEO. And within our field of design, they're really important. And you could consider them the founders of user-centered design. So what they always start with is observation. There's not knowing what the problem is the biggest problem in design. It's saying, okay, if you want this, I'll make this. It's really important to first do observations about what is the user's world. What is the context of this whole problem? Then you do brainstorming, and I could talk for days about the problem with brainstorming, but if you do it well, it's a really good technique. If you do it badly, you can get really big problems. So they have a lot of techniques that they do, and these you're probably familiar with, that when you're brainstorming, you shouldn't judge ideas, but just write them down, whatever they are, and defer judgment till you're actually converging. Okay, but anyway, this is a phase where things come together. This is a really important step, which Wander also talked about. We call it rapid prototyping. It means that you're immediately starting to make things tangible. So if you have a couple of ideas, they're only worth anything if they're tangible. And I think this is actually probably the biggest difference between academia and design. That in the whole process of making things tangible, you meet new problems. And it helps you to actually know what you're doing. Because in your mind you can make perfect solutions. That's not that hard. Until you have to really make them and you think, oh, this is really hard, I can do this, I need different techniques, I need something else to do it. And this is actually something you really have to engage with. This is where you get really insecure. So even in making a presentation is already a very tangible way to get your head cleared. Okay, and finally, there's a refining stage. You could also call it a production stage. Whenever you edit a film or you make whatever, there is the hard work of actually making it. If you have to do the edit on a documentary, there is this period where you have to 24 hours lock yourself in and actually do the editing. This is a refining stage, but it's also a design stage. You still make adaptations and you still make choices that are really important. And finally, there's an implementation stage where your solution actually meets the real world. And you still have to do adaptations because whatever you thought of is probably useless in reality. So you have to make changes again to make it actually work. Okay, so there was a question, I think, of you of the difference between academics, art and design, and this sheet sort of tries to make that clear. So in science there's a lot of focus on the process, so actually on the method, the scientific method. In art the focus is really on the outcome. It's maybe also about the process, but the thing we actually see is about the outcome. And in design, the focus is actually on both. And here you see this really complex spiraling areas of interest. Okay, so this is obviously up for dispute. What are the differences? I think it's good to have discussions about it as well, because I think the overlap is really big, but the difference as well. Okay, so I hope you are all familiar with this process, that you generate about 100 ideas. I hope you all did that, and then end up with 10 things that you harvest. These are ideas you're actually developing, these ideas you're testing, and there's one big idea that actually sees the world. But this funneling is really important. I see it with students also, that we think of one solution. And then we constantly are fighting to defend this solution. Also to teachers, to coaches, and you say, well, I have this one idea and it's really good. So, but what if it's not? And I think to design from 100 and saying, okay, so this is good, this is good, this is better even, and to make combinations of ideas, I think this is actually the better way to work. So don't stare yourself blind on one idea. Okay, so this is probably getting a bit boring with all the models and stuff, but I think this is quite relevant as well. It's a model by Arthur Koestler. It's already from the 50s, but he did a big study on jokes, the art of joking, of I don't know the English word actually, a mob, a gag. And what he defined, and I think this is also relevant for storytelling anyway, is that where the two planes meet, so there's the plane of the expected reaction. So there's a story and it's developing, you think you know what's coming. And then there's always this point where you think, change it around. And that's the essence of a gag, that you are taken by surprise. And interestingly enough, this little explosion is the same thing that's happening when you're in a creative act. It's not the light bulb above your head. It's when you are dealing with expectedness and something unexpected happens. So that's good. So this is about learning and inventing. This is actually about the same topic. So there are things that are familiar, that are good, there are things that are strange. And you have to permanently make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. That's what you're doing when you're acting creatively. So everything you know, you have to question and you have to turn it around. And everything you don't know, you have to really take into your domain. Okay, so this model, Nienke and Wander probably still know it, is something we came up with here in Breda. I'm not going to go into it that deeply, but we try to define the thing that you are actually making as a void, which it is. You're probably in that stage right now. You had an assignment, and the thing you are actually making or conceiving is a void. What is it? There's nothing yet. So something has to come out of that. And it has to fit for users, for stakeholders, for systems, and for yourself. So this is actually what you're shaping. This is from a book for children, but it's a really good book, How to Be an Explorer of Your World. And this is something I want to go into a bit deeper. It's about explorations. This is our official design model here at the school. It's not that important because I think I mentioned everything before, but it's spiral, and that's a big difference. So it's not a linear process that you do one time. It's something you keep doing until eternity. And especially when you're designing interactive systems, take Facebook, which is an interactive system. It's not that you say, okay, we're done here. It's in the world now. They adapt it 24 hours a day. So that's why you have to keep doing these cycles. It's not a hit and run job. And it's actually fractal, which means that in every phase, you do the small phase again. So even when you're brainstorming, you're actually going to all these stages. And sometimes it happens in 5 minutes. And not unimportantly, and that's why I really like this project, is diversity. If you are in a brainstorm team, if you're lucky, people come from really different backgrounds and they have really different ways of looking at things, of making sense of things. And that's why you're working in teams, which is, I think, really important in design, is that you have to have all these styles together. There's nothing worse than putting 4 people in a room who think exactly alike. Nothing will happen. And there's, of course, which may probably also be familiar, there are levels in expertise. People who start designing follow rules. They are really looking for rules. People who are really expert designers, they thrive on intuition. They just do things from here and they say, this feels good. So it's tacit knowledge. Okay, so this is not really important here. I'll try to go to some examples here. First some considerations, maybe practical for your project. I didn't put this in English anymore, I'm sorry. This is Marshall McLuhan's page from his book, and I really like the image. It means that whenever we're looking forward, we're actually looking backward. So this is a shot taken in a motor vehicle, but when we look back, we're actually still perceiving it as a coach, is that the word? I don't know, English people here. Koets. So that means that whenever what we see is not what we see is what we have learned up till now. And that's really important. That's why you have to question things. Another big pit is that we create things and we fall in love with them and sometimes don't really, we're not really sure about what it means what we made. And things have a life of their own in the end. So that's really complex, and that's also the reason why you have to create little Frankensteins to see what actually happens, because I think in the mind of the inventor this was the most beautiful creature ever, but he's quite biased. And this image I also like. It's of course it's Fantasia, but it's based on a much older story. which is that we try to trick reality. So in this case, Mickey has to do the cleaning, and he's the pupil of a wizard, and he thinks he's smart, so he asks the brushes, "Why don't you do the cleaning?" But things get out of hand, and there's more brushes than ever, and they start throwing out water and water and water, and there's no way for him to stop it until the big wizard comes back and says, everything's gone. But if we design, and we design on a systemic level, then it's really important that we try to see the consequences of what we design. The Facebook example is maybe also interesting. What are we actually designing? And maybe most importantly, to be creative, I told you a little bit about it. The misunderstandings about creativity are really annoying as well. Creativity is about crayons and freedom and colors, and that's not what it's about. It's actually really hard work, and you need a high intelligence to do it. I mean, everybody can do it, everybody is creative, but not in the sense that everybody can make drawings with crayons. That's not the point. Good. So starting is the hardest part. You probably already noticed that in this project as well. Where do we start? You can actually start anywhere. That's important. You can start by making things, you can start by thinking. But a good way to do it is trying to make the abstract as tangible as possible and make the implicit as explicit as possible. That goes a long way also in your attitude towards the project. Are you really sure that you mentioned to your teammates what's in it for you? Why are you there? What do you want to achieve? What is your ambition? Do you want to make money? Do you want to be famous? Do you want to cooperate? And a lot of the times those really simple notions aren't outspoken in a project. What are the hidden implications of what we're doing together? Is it just because you're being told to design something that you're now designing something? Or so where's your own engagement? Stuff like that seems complicated, but if you're starting on a project and you're not sure about these things, then you end up meeting them later on, and then you're in trouble. Okay, this is an image a friend of mine came up with, and I think it's a really good image. When we start with a project, we have to make observations and make sense of the assignment, of the context. And what I like about this image is it's a lamp, obviously, and it has capacity to shed light on something that's in the dark. The interesting thing about the lamp is if you're really close by, so you have your light here, you can see things really, really clear. But you only see a really small part of the table. If you lift the lamp, you see actually more, but the light is less. This is the big paradox. You can do things both ways. So you either have to go and be really close and be really specific and clear, or you have to zoom out and see the bigger picture. Both levels have their own advantages, but you shouldn't forget one. This is just a sheet, but the letter of abstraction is quite important here. How abstract are you in your conversation, in your dialogue? Are you permanently using words like concept or citizenship? And do you actually know what you're talking about, or is it a mental concept? Both realities exist, and I tried once, this is extremely blurry, to put them in sort of a diagram, where this is the world that we perceive and that I can touch, and I'll take a sip of coffee to prove it. But the concept of coffee is actually somewhere here, and the concept of food or drink is actually somewhere here. And the concept of logistics that's also in the coffee is actually somewhere up here. So all things are related to concepts. Everything that's tangible is also in a concept and vice versa. And once you know that, you can cycle upwards from complexity and abstraction to tangible things and back again. In a way, this is what design is about. You take highly abstract things, make them tangible, see what happens, and make them abstract again. I hope that makes sense. Maybe we can discuss this later. So finally, some pictures. This is about research, I guess, but it could be about a lot of things. It's about going into the world with either a camera or a recording machine or whatever and record data. What does the world look like? This is all in order to find patterns and to make sense of what we're trying to do. So little details can be the shine on his pants because he sits down every day. It can be the chaos of cables. It can be anything. So you have to be really open to see things. Your whole project is about storytelling. I guess you have to have an eye and a sense for stories. This picture is a story. It contains maybe 1,000 stories, but so you have to actually actively collect these impressions. That means also that if you look into abstractions like food, that you should actively go into the world and find instances of that concept. So this has to do with food, also has to do with refrigeration, supermarkets, economy, logistics, and this has to do with food as well. And this has to do with food as well. And it's beautiful. I mean, even as an image, this contains the whole world. Everything's there. So I think, but maybe I'm getting really almost religious now, but I think that every image contains the whole world, conceptually. So whenever you do studies into any subject, you have all these dimensions. You can do it in time, you can do it in space. So this is from the 30s, and this is even older. And it's about the simple act of eating together. But if you look at the picture closely, then it's about more than just enjoying dinner. It's about who is the boss? Would it be nice to sit at this table? Obviously a nice guy, but you see who's in charge here. And here, look at the women. What are they doing? They're standing and serving the food. So it's about social classes. It's about families, it's about socio-economical relations, but it's also about food. This is about food as well. So, what I always try to do when I start with a project, and you're probably doing the same thing, is look at funny stuff. So I try to find patterns, but I also try to find outliers of patterns. So, as you probably know, Google has scanned all books in the world or something like that. But what a lot of people don't know is that this is actually a physical act. So there's a whole team of about 1,200 people who go to libraries, cut up all the books, scan them in or photograph them and make them digital, and we think, oh wow, this is Google. This is a really physical process. And sometimes there's a really small hiccup in the system and you see a finger. And they all wear these pink gloves to touch the really old books. So this is what I find interesting, because if this image wouldn't have existed, you would probably not have even have thought of this as a physical act. You think, oh well, they are digitalizing everything. Yeah. It's the same with the Google car, you know, with the Street View. They're actually cars. And they're driving around. And if they can't come into your street, then your street is not on Google Street View. So things also get interesting when you make steps in time. So if you put 2 images together or 4 images together, you see patterns. This is really something we see a lot happening now. So we have old and young. And this is something one of my students did. These are cars on the parking lot here, and you can actually see where somebody's coming from. The more messy they are, the longer the travel distance. This is a beautiful image. Could be art, but it's not. This is like a tiny, how do you call it? Plastic plakband? Scotch tape, is that the word? You put it on one and you lift it off. Get an impression. This is also about impressions. This is all really hazy stuff, but it's experimenting with the physical world in order to get images that actually tell you more. This is a series about teenage girls who are all exactly the same age, but they differ in space, time. So, interestingly enough, you see this girl and you see this girl, and there's a lot of similarity. Of course, also a lot of difference. This is a farm in Holland, 2015. This as well. These are things we don't really see that much, you know? When we think about food or farming. We know about bio-industry, but what have we seen of the bio-industry? Did we go there? Did we film there? Or is this something you thought, oh, that's exactly what I thought it would be? This weird image, this is actually what's happening there. This is what it looks like. And these are the girls who are processing the little chickens, but they have their own designated smoking area. So this is farming in the new world. So it's good to know what that looks like. Yeah, this is a bit of a bad image, but the IDEO company I was telling you about, when they try to explore the world, we do this in school here as well, but we actually sometimes try to mimic, we call it empathy design, but if you want to design something for people with bad knees, you actually have to be that yourself. So you have to physically disable yourself to put yourself in the mind of somebody who has a disability, for instance. This is from a really beautiful series. There's a lot more. Jane Fulton-Surrey, who did research on people's design solutions. So these are all ordinary solutions, really practical solutions, which are the bomb, I think. I couldn't do this. This is the best. But you have to have an eye for them, because the whole world is full with these little solutions people make in systems and without systems. So similarities that you notice, sometimes things are not related at all, and sometimes they are. The ES, which is of course in the news a lot and makes a lot of its own imagery, is directly related to Guantanamo Bay. So they wear the same clothes, which is, I think, not a coincidence, but what does it mean? But it's interesting. This is also interesting. This is way more abstract, but this is a visualization of a really small crash that happened on the stock market. And somebody's trying to make sense of what's actually happening. Yeah, this is an image about art. This is a bit the creativity bit I was talking about. These are managers making drawings, being creative, and this is also an image about creativity, I guess. Do the Van Gogh project and see all the small variations. But this as well, so I guess in an academic way this is quite related. Good. This is really. It's probably you're completely lost now. But this is a scheme from Bourdieu, who did these really fine observations in sociology about class and how people behave in acting according to their class. And he makes these really beautiful schemes to make sense of what's going on. And this is my favorite photo book ever. It's called Evidence, and there's actually not one photograph that was made by an artist. It's actually only archive material from FBI, CIA, secret agency, who have their own archive of pictures they do from experiments. And these experiments are really completely insane. But taken out of context, they're extremely beautiful in themselves. This image is really, really beautiful. And you don't know what they're doing, but it's... So, photo books, just observations on the street. rituals, patterns, which is in the end what it's all about. Do you see patterns in behavior? This is a small movie. I always show this movie, but I'll skip it for now. These are my children, these two, and this is a friend. I always show this to see what creativity is really about, which is that it's about a dialogue about what you're creating. So they're actually actively discussing what they're making, which is a fantasy world, but it's open for dialogue. Why don't you do this here? Oh yeah, that would be good. And this little guy, who is a friend of my youngest son, is just making a mandala. He's not listening at all, he's just in the zone. So these are different patterns. This is the Angela Merkel. It's quite funny, of course, but it is a pattern. She always wears the same clothes, and she has them in all shades of the rainbow. This is a nice example as well, because this is about evoking patterns. This is a project by two artists who put plastic bottles in China on the street. And then they put up a camera, because they noticed that the streets are extremely clean in China. But who actually does the cleaning? They didn't know that. They never saw garbage people or something. So they actively put these plastic bottles here, and then they noticed there's this complete army of people who are always on the lookout for, do I see a plastic bottle? Yes. And then they put it in a bag or something, and they bring it to a recycling thing, and they get a little money. But this is something you wouldn't have known if you wouldn't have actually did an experiment, which is also a relation to science, I guess. I think the big difference is that they're not trying to prove that they are absolutely scientifically right. But they are right about something, but I won't show this as well, it's too long. This is William White, who was really revolutionary in observing patterns in the city. So he put up cameras on top of big skyscrapers so he could see the movement of people, the social hierarchy of people. It's really amazing stuff. Lots of more patterns. These are Greek people going to the bank before it closes. So this is, and these are people waiting in line for a new game. And there is a similarity, of course, in the lineup, but the motivation is completely different. This is work by Hans Eichelboom, a really famous Dutch photographer, and he also always looks at patterns. He collects people like specimens of, so all the Scarface lovers of the world. It can be whatever. It's for him, it's impossible to not see a pattern. Sides of televisions, yeah, well, whatever. So there's, I think, a big relation between being really obsessive about collecting and pattern making and design. You have to be really curious about if this is happening once, where does it happen again? So postcards, the material doesn't matter. This is something that's really weird but really beautiful as well. This is where it meets art, I guess, in being obsessive. This guy takes a photograph from his window every day, and he's obsessed with the beauty of the reflection of the tree in a car. And he just makes them every day. That's what he does. No, it's interesting. This is a different collection of really weird trees that turn out to be GSM masts. What's the word? They're for telecommunication. But they're all dressed up as trees. Some weird stuff. This I also like, about explorations. This is really beautiful scenery, scenic landscapes. But what there actually are people going in Grand Theft Auto, the game, and going to the fringes of the game. I don't know if you know this game, but it's a complete world. It's vast. You can drive for hours in that world. You are in a car and you can actually go to the scenery. So the funny thing is that the designer of this game actually made a world that they don't even know themselves. It's so big that there are all these little nooks and crannies where nobody went before. So that's interesting. Okay. This is Eric Gill, who makes really fantastic photographs. This he did by making a camera on a really big pole, like 20 meters high, and trying to find the places where the pigeons are. The pigeons are always stuck underneath the bridge. You see them coming out, but you don't know what it looks like. So he made these really creepy photographs of, it's almost like dungeons made of pigeon shit. And it's a really, really weird world that we never saw before. Quite gory. So traces, I think, are really important as well. If you look for instances of abstract concepts like disaster or falling down, then most of the time what you end up with are the traces of that act, not the act itself. So be really conscious of traces. Okay, I'll skip this one. This is really beautiful as well. We can call it art, we can call it research, it doesn't matter. Somebody noticed this scene. Nienke, and this is one of our favorite Dutch, let's call them designers. I don't know, they're artists, designers, scientists, that's interesting about them. Yeah, they're a really interesting mix, also in their process. So what they did at a project in an area in the south of Holland, I guess it was, and it was about this little park. In Heerlen, yeah. And this park was actually never used. So it was about citizen partnerships. This whole project was about engaging the citizens with their own neighborhood. And people said, well, I never go into the park because there's no one there. I think it's completely empty. So they put up a camera on top of the building and made time-lapse pictures of this park. And indeed, the interval was about 15 minutes. It's completely empty. Until they made the interval about 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden people appeared who took out their dogs, let them have a shit, and went out of the park really quickly. You wouldn't notice this if your interval is incorrect, then you're probably missing something. So what they did is they took in Photoshop all the people that were actually in the park during the day, they put them all in one image, which looks great. It looks like the Vondelpark on Queen's Day, King's Day. So it looks really cozy, and they presented this to the people in the neighborhood, and they said, wow, let's do more together. Who are these people? They had a lot of other projects I won't go into. This is also about them. The Pink Pony Express, yeah, that's the name of the collective. You can look them up. This is work by a photographer who stitches a lot of photographs together to make sense. Okay, so this is still in Dutch as well, I'm sorry. What is important, if you have all these impressions that I gave some examples of, photography, sound, whatever, how do you lay them out? How can you display them so that you can see the connections? Yeah, this is very beautiful. I'm sorry, this is in the wrong place, but I really, really like this photo because they have all these elderly people and they are wearing great inventions, which is a really, really beautiful way, I think, of telling history. YouTube. Yeah, it's fantastic. But anyway, it was about layout. So what we did here in the design school as well is always have people take imagery with them and laying it out and trying to shove it around. Make connections between things that are unconnected. One of our students, and especially also one of Nienke's students, made this small study of YouTube makeup girls, which I still really love. It's just a sketch, but the only thing she's doing is seeing this pattern and putting it in a grid, and then you certainly notice the similarities in the way the girls are presenting themselves in the makeup. So it doesn't really matter how you display it, but you have to display it at once. I think this is maybe the most crucial thing about making a concept as well. You can't put it in your head. You have to get it out of your head and put it on the wall, on the table, doesn't matter. to see relations. So these are some mapping tools that probably you're all familiar with, also in science, they're really popular, but they can really help you to make sense. So for designers, the post-it is probably the best invention ever made, because you can write things down quickly, you can shove it around. When things get really complicated, the map also gets more complicated. So these are walls and these are outcomes of really complex processes. And I visited a conference in Oslo which was about giga mapping, which if you have really complex processes, then you end up with walls that are from there to there covered in one model, and you can actually walk around in it. So I guess in the end it's about grasping complexity, and that's really important. Good, and then maybe to end this off, because it's very mumbo jumbo, whenever you are in that phase that you have things and you see all the connections, then you have to actually bring them together again, which is probably the phase you're in right now. We need a concept. We have so many impressions. We need one idea, which is not true. But okay, so this really simple scheme, which is from creative problem solving from the 50s already, is a really good way to just do the letters one by one and say, okay, can we substitute this with something else? Can we combine this with that? Can we adapt this to this? And these are actually creative techniques that are really rule-based, but they are very effective. So just some examples of combinations. These are some principles. This is a really weird image. It's really beautiful. This is a whole series about mining. And what this person did, this is the thing that has been mined, is that the word? Yeah, you know what I mean? So this is the stuff that actually came out of it. It's really, 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 really small. This is it. So it shows actually in one picture the relation between what you need to do in order to get that. Sorry? I don't know. I think it's diamond. In the series it was also about copper, gold, and the ratios are really different. I think this is diamond. So this is the amount of ground you need to shove to get one of those diamonds. This is really beautiful as well. I don't know if you know this. This is actually somewhere between science and design. A woman who took photographs of the body language of men and women in public space. And then you see that men in general, at least in the 70s, were really, they owned the public space. That's what you see here. They are very relaxed. They always have open legs, open bodies, and the women are all, you see it in their position, the guys are dudes. And women all are sitting really close. And so these really small observations tell you something about the way the world works. This is art as well, but also interesting because this is a photograph with a shutter time of 34 months. So you see a complete process of the building of the new Museum of Modern Art. And it's weird because you don't even know what you're looking at actually. These are planets. Oh yeah, there's the other image. This is copper. This is something a student once made. No, I won't show these. Not enough time. And this is something who makes, somebody who makes carpets out of interesting fungus patterns. And she makes them into really beautiful kleden. Carpets, yeah. Tapestries. So this is Eric Gill again. And it's a series called A Series of Disappointments, and what you're seeing are these crumbled things, and they're actually betting tickets from the lottery, from the horse racing in England. And what is really beautiful about it, the shape is telling something about the frustration of not winning, of course, again. And it's a complete thing. Okay, so I'll end there, because these are obviously not end results of design, they're just more mental pictures of synthesis, of how you bring it all together. So I think, as far as I understood, that's where you are now. You have to bring it together. I hope you have enough material to bring together. So that's it. Oh yeah, and one more is nice. I like it. All right. Thank you.
I imagine there are questions.
Yes, questions.
Flood net
Yeah.
with,
Flooding.
pictures.
Comments also. Yes. Hmm. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. No, I understand. Well, stories are really hard to represent because they're time-based. It's really the complexity within itself. If you want to have a visual scheme like I just showed, you... Mm-hmm. Tags. Tags. I mean, you tag the stories. You label them. Mm-hmm. 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 I don't know. You have to make the tunnel, I guess. You have to prototype the tunnel. Because I understand the metaphor, tunnel and theme things, but how does it feel? Is it a dungeon? Is it a subway? Yeah, well, I guess if you see it in a diverging, converging way, then I guess the idea of representing stories representing time by way of a tunnel is a concept, right? And I think you have to make variations of that concept. So Apple Time Machine is a representation of a tunnel metaphor. It's actually you go through all the files like this, but touching a wall without seeing is also a metaphor. So I guess you need a lot of variations on your concepts. And maybe the stage before that is, okay, so a tunnel is one metaphor. Can we think of at least 20 other metaphors? And then trying to, I don't know, maybe you've seen a movie, or maybe you have some other vision in your head of what this tunnel would look like or feel like. I guess that's what is hard to make tangible, but maybe visit a tunnel and think, will this idea work, you know? It's not always easy, but I do think it's important, if I understand you correctly, that it's more than just a mental metaphor. Yeah. You could go in a concept meeting and say, well, I have this metaphor of a tunnel. Yeah, let's roll with that. Yeah. But you could also say that maybe the metaphor in itself, which is a way of navigating through stories, is separate from the stories themselves. I think it's important that you know what you're designing. Are you designing navigation, or are you designing the complete experience? Yeah. But maybe that's hard to do in one time, you know. Maybe that's really big. That's like all. Yeah, exactly. Try to subdivide it and brainstorm on each of the sub-themes, you know. Then putting it together again. It's really hard to design a complete experience out of the blue. It's not easy. I hope that sort of answers it. Maybe we'll speak later on, and this is the thing, you know, talking about things is hard. It's very abstract. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like it leaves it open that we will understand frustration.
Yeah.
It's the food is shared.
Exactly.
But so for me the process in there is like, and this is what I'm struggling with trying to work with design. It's really like, okay, so I'm struggling with finding words of the concept. Find a way how to connect these concepts and stuff. And for me that's like, so now we're working towards like not do that, or the other way around,
Mm-hmm.
visualize it.
Mm-hmm.
But then how do you, is that how do you relate this to, I don't know if you can answer the question, I'm just trying to see.
Yeah, no, I think I know what you're saying. Yeah.
When I'm struggling with the word, my point of view where it's like I try to grasp the concept.
Yeah.
I try to,
Yeah.
and then this is where it's coming from, like, oh, and then how do you learn to make this?
Yeah. 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 Well, this is highly abstract as well, but if you look at it from a semiotic point of view, where words and images are all signs, and if you see the act of sense making, which I think we share, right, in science and in design, we're trying to understand things, make sense of them. But maybe we use different signs, and it's about, I guess, language and words is a really good way to have very abstract things in a very tiny space. The thing is, if you want to work with them, so not explain something or write something down in order for the other to understand, but if you want to use it as, you want to play with concepts, maybe that's what I'm trying to say. So how do you do that? You can write the words on a piece of paper and shove them around, of course, but probably not too much will happen. It's only when you push yourself to say, okay, so how can I experience the word that's written down here? So take, for instance, the word citizenship. Can you show me one image of what it looks like? It's hard. You can show me, I'm a citizen, but everybody will say, well, that's a man, that's not a citizen. So what is it? And if it has no representation in the real world, and it doesn't exist. Which is strange, because I think there are images that represent citizenship, but it's probably a lot of them. And I guess in that process of really trying to make a concept like that tangible, that you're trying to make sense of it. So do not accept the word citizenship. Because, exactly, yeah.
And scientists use concepts to understand reality.
Yeah.
So, in trying to make that connection, okay, we have citizenship, but in reality, there are different practices
Yeah.
where people perform that citizenship, and they are manifestations of that concept.
Yeah.
We can know what that means by studying the field methodology. That makes a scientific work, I think. And it makes a connection to the designer.
Or here. The words.
In the end, like, for example, you can make it like this beautiful experience, try to visualize it. And then in the end, step into explaining the concept process.
Yeah.
How you are ensuring that you are not actually doing another kind of thing. So, when you are showing, maybe, how you can assume that people who only see that will see what you try to see.
By testing.
I think that it is the medium, the writing stuff now, it gives you a comfortable idea of what I can add another page to give it more context, to make sure I make my point. And if it's still not there, you can add another chapter that adds to that. And you have a conclusion, that's the format that I think you as an academic feel comfortable with. But what you should be able to do, I guess, is let that go for a bit and see how, as you look at one image, how an image can touch with separate parts of it, including separate parts of the text. And I think it's more of a personal thing that you feel really comfortable with writing stuff down, because then you know exactly that once you've read it, you know it. And that's something that you can make sure writing it down. It's like you're making a box and you're putting nails on it and you're opening one goes with this text and then you're giving the box to someone else. And then it's a clear box and you can open it and not send it out. But with an image it's more of a reasonable interpretation.
Please know that it's not about only the distinction between images and words. You see them all signs. The whole work also for this project could be completely typographical. Could be all words, either verbal or written down. So it's, I guess it's more, that's also what you're saying, in the end, it's the user, the one who's using you're interacting with your system. It's up to them. So the appreciation of the work and the clarity of the work is in the system that you design. Which is something else, and when you write things down and you want to really be very specific about what you're trying to say, let's say it's the difference between a novel and an academic paper. Every novelist would say that the appreciation of the work is in the eye of the reader. It's not up to me. That's what every novelist says. It's out in the world. It's not my book anymore. I did my best. I designed a system for the other one to appreciate. And that's completely radically different than when you write a scientific paper. You would hope that people won't say, but there's a difference there, of course. But My presentation was really visual, I know, but when I say go out in the world and collect, you can also collect words. If you stand at the bus stop, or you go to the Lidl supermarket, you ask people what is citizenship, and they translate your words, and they say, oh, no, I mean shit. And those exact words are already more tangible than, so it's not only imagery. I really like the mix, because it makes you think different, but having a conversation or a dialogue with people who think not like you is also a really good way to criticize these concepts. And it's not only about what you think citizenship is, it's about what we all think. And the tension is that words are really, really brilliant. Concepts are really brilliant, because I can talk to you like I'm doing now, and you sort of understand each other. Even if I would say, it's about citizenship, you would all say, yeah. And at the same time, you have to really question that concept. Do you really know what I'm talking about? Maybe it means something completely different. Maybe you are coming from North Korea, citizenship, yeah. So, I guess it's about having an open mind for meaning, and especially when the concept.
I also think that within design, also always being attentive to the intended effect your message or interaction has to be is one of the points of attack by questioning your work.
Yeah.
What's the intended effect? How do audiences, when I test my testing is also like nature, when I test what happens, and that can be interesting because then it's in the world.
Yeah.
You take that and adjust, not only by trying to get your idea more clear about, but also being maybe more open. So I want people to put their own ideas in school. It makes it more interesting. I want people to play with it.
Play is important. And by the way, a lot of the design research methods that we can go into, they come from science. They come from sociology, anthropology, ethnography. We just use them, I guess, in a more opportunistic way. I don't need to do it right. I just need to bring something, bring it in my cave and play with it. So I don't have to write that paper thing up. Are you really right that 60% of Dutch citizens, no, I don't know. It's just intuition. That's enough. So, and maybe one more thing about that is first of all, science can only relate to data that is historical. And design is about making something that's not there yet. So there are different things at stake there. And science is about being true. It's about the truth. Design is about, does it work? Really different paradigm. So, but that's why I like that you have to do it together. You will probably find designers a lot more opportunistic and say, well, I don't need to test this, I know enough. And you'll probably find yourself as a scientist saying, yes, or not. Yeah, anyone else? So, short break.